Welcome, Jason. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm Bosky, and I'm the founder of PM Dojo. So just a little bit before we get started, participate. This is supposed to be really, really an interactive session and not a lecture, which is why we're not doing like a presentation chat with this is the recipe, because there is no recipe to transition into product. And keep up, on PM Dojo's social channels, both on LinkedIn as well as Instagram. We have a number of other interesting events as well that we do on a regular basis. So what we're going to cover today, again, we're going to spend the bulk of 30 to 40 minutes in, a conversational Q&A with Jason. And again, I've picked a few questions from all of you who have submitted during registration. And then I've allocated 15 minutes at the end. There were quite a few people during registration that I saw that many of you are trying to get into product management. Even you had very specific questions about, well, is there a certification I need to do? What course do I need to do? So I've kept that last 15 minutes. I will be there answering all those very, very specific questions. Just a little bit about PM Dojo. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, PM Dojo is a global community. We have folks from all over the world, pretty much every country represented. And what we are really trying to do from a mission standpoint is to make the tech industry, specifically around product, which includes product management and UX, more equitable, accessible, diverse, and inclusive. And what that means is to create opportunities and pathways for people, irrespective of who you are, where you live. You don't have to go to a top-tier school. You don't have to have a college degree. You may have tons of gap years. You may come from a marginalized intersectionality or another intersectionality. It doesn't matter. There is a place for everyone. It comes down to having those opportunities, having the right information, having people that you know and you can reach out to in the network, and having the right skill set and confidence. And that is what PM Dojo is all about. And so we have mentors from some biggest tech companies and product leaders who help our community members, and we also have fellows from all over the world. How do we help our community? We run several free community events. I think in March, this is our 4th event already, and we have one more this week. So a lot of free events that we have. If you're interested, make sure you subscribe on our website, and I'll share all those details as well after our event. And then specifically for people who are looking to make that transition happen, or maybe you are a mid-career professional and you're trying to kind of get into product. Maybe you're an aspiring person trying to get into product, or maybe your early career, and you really want to get that end-to-end experience. We actually have a very unique product accelerator program. So this is where you get to collaborate as a real team with developers and take a fuzzy idea all the way into a launch and measure the impact. So really stepping into the role. And it's been amazing to have 95% follow success rate, which is really, really groundbreaking and very, very humbling. So again, if anyone's interested, happy to share that information. But without further ado, let's get started. So Jason, welcome again, and thank you so much for doing this. I'm so grateful. Maybe we can start with a little bit, of who you are, at what point in life and career and work you are. Maybe if you want to share that a little bit.
Yeah, totally. And let me add to, I'm so inspired by the PM Dojo mission as well. I think, just talking to other product managers, and the more we achieve that mission, the better product managers we're going to have too. So super inspiring. And also, thanks for having me on too. I'm glad we're also going with a conversational format. So if you, I think it's welcome. If you have any questions, just put them in the chat or jump right in. The more organic the conversation is, the more natural it'll be. And frankly, I wish I had talked to others who made the journey into product management as I was starting my journey into PM. I think to a certain extent, right, I was a little intimidated to ask. I didn't want to ask questions and, feel like I was showing a side of me that I didn't want to be showing. But in hindsight, of course, I should have done that. It would have helped my journey a lot. So yeah, happy to be here. To share a little bit about me. So I currently live in New York. For fun, I'm a big distance runner. I like running long distances. I grew up in Massachusetts. I'm a proud first-generation college student. I went to UMass. I studied operations. My first job out of college was working for a large wholesaler. I wanted to prioritize a rotational program so I could learn just as much as possible. Worked in some warehouse automation. It was pretty cool. And then that's when I went to Uber Freight. And I've been at Uber Freight for 4 years now. It was at Uber Freight that I first learned what a product manager was. Beforehand, I just didn't know that that job existed. I didn't know there was a name for somebody who identified problems that needed to be solved and why they were worth tackling, and then worked with a team to try to solve that problem. But as soon as I learned that that existed, I knew that's exactly what I wanted to do. So fast forward, I've been a product manager for 2 years now. I lead a team at Uber Freight that's responsible for the logistics. So there's the carrier experience, the people who are actually moving that freight, the shipper experience, people that need freight moved, and then our team does everything we can to try to make that that connection as seamless as possible. I love it. It's the best job in the world. My journey took a few years as well. I definitely learned a lot of things throughout it. It was long, but I also loved every second of it too. So I think that's my intro. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. I have a couple of follow-up questions, and again, for everyone who's joining, feel free to add any questions on the chat, and I'm gonna see how we can kind of incorporate that. A couple things kind of stood out to me. So you said you worked in the warehouse and operations, and that kind of ultimately led you to Uber Freight. You also mentioned about the rotational program, which I think, is an amazing program, especially for those, I guess, who are able to kind of get through it. If you are studying and things like that, it might not be available for mid-career folks. If we kind of missed that boat, I had missed that boat after graduating. I had visa issues back in the day in the US. But how did you, so you were in operations, how did you kind of figure out from all of this, Uber Freight might be an interesting place to kind of get into? Was it luck? Was it, they came to your campus? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. And then operations, by the way, too, wasn't really all that intentional. I think I changed my major 4 times in undergrad. I think I ended up finishing with something crazy like 160 credits, but I only had one major officially. And largely it was because I found kind of everything interesting, but I had no idea what I wanted to be doing with my life. And I think, there's not a clear career path for that. Interestingly enough, product management is arguably the best fit for people like that, though, where if you're passionate about it, and you're really inspired by just a variety of issues and you really want to solve them and you want to use a variety of things. So I got really lucky in landing on product. With operations, it seemed just the best fit. It was within the business school at UMass. Seemed like a really good fit where it was kind of operations and information management more broadly, and about how to achieve high performing organizations and efficiency as a way to transform it. So we did things like studying Toyota and studying Trader Joe's as really great examples of operational excellence was used to really create such a competitive advantage. And that was really inspiring to me because it was at the intersection of everything. So yeah, that led me to taking a rotational program across very operationally focused things. But it was in my last rotation, we were doing an implementation for a new TMS, which is transportation management software. And we were doing that so that we could connect our orders for how we're ordering different groceries to warehouse management systems and also to tendering to different carriers. And we saw most of the complexity was in we maintain this whole routing guide of carriers that would move our shipments. And it just seemed really obvious this should be somebody else's problem. And that's what led me to talk to Uber Freight and then ultimately get the Uber Freight job. But I will also add too, I didn't start applying to tech roles until I was talking to a friend at my company and I learned that she was applying to tech roles. Beforehand, not many people at UMass end up working in the tech industry. I assumed that was off limits and limited to people that went to Stanford or Wharton. And I was blown away when she said that she was applying to, she was applying to Uber Freight. And I said, no way, we can't do that. I am not qualified enough to do that. It turns out, though, Uber Freight is actually very open to people of different backgrounds. So they didn't care that I went to a state school. They cared that I was hungry and I was willing to learn and I was willing to put in the work for it as well, too. And I'm really lucky that they saw through that. And in my work today, too, I still try to find those same types of people because also, frankly, they make the best product managers.
You bring up a couple of things, and it's interesting because I had written about it, I think maybe a week ago or so, and that was around what is your shape. So it's not Ravi Mehta's concept of what is your shape, but I actually reflected on a chat I had about 15 years ago with a very senior leader at a company that I just met for coffee, and I was completely lost about what I wanted to do in my career. Back then, tech product, it was not what it is today. I mean, these roles didn't even exist formally. And I was really struggling to, I think, find what does my career look like, because I had everyone who was coming up with their 5-year plan, 10-year plan, and a career roadmap, and I did not have anything. And she just asked me, so let's kind of figure out, what is your shape? Are you pi? Are you X? Are you T? And I'm like, what the hell is this? You know? And it took me some time to kind of understand. And I think what you mentioned there, Jason, operations, this a lot of other kind of skills other than, I think, just this one specific thing. I think they make like great product managers, because if you started out, my shape essentially started out as a T. I've evolved into an X right now. But T essentially means that you may have some expertise and experience in one area, but then you also have these broad number of skills. And that is something that makes you a T shape. And that kind of helps you really do well in product management, because that's just the nature of the role. So that was kind of really interesting that you brought about the thing. Tell me a little bit about when you joined Uber Freight. You did not join as product management, correct? You
That's
were
correct. Yeah. As a business analyst was my title.
analyst. Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about, how did that transition happen? Was it just, you kind of did and there was an opportunity? Like, tell me a little bit. And the reason why I'm asking is, we know that an internal transition is one of those options that is available to a lot of people, again, if you can avail that. But it is not an easy switch to make, because whenever you're making an internal switch, it's very easy for the rest of folks in your company to see you in a certain light, and they cannot see you in another role, right? And so can you walk us through and maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, totally. So in a large sense, I got really lucky in the fact that I joined Uber Freight relatively early. I think it was a year and a half old by the time that I joined it. And it was supported by Uber as a parent company and had really great product leadership in it. And, it's obviously been stable enough across the last 4 years so that I could grow into the product manager role as well. So it's definitely not an option which exists for everybody. And for a lot of others, I want to say arguably a more common route is to actually, Bosky, you probably know this. I don't know which is the most common route. I'm not sure. Is it actually leaving to go into a new company the first time?
It's interesting you ask. I think, in all of my years, I haven't seen any one common route. I think there are patterns. I think there are lots of people who work at a larger, mid or larger company. If you are working in a mid or larger company that already has a product function, then I think making that internal switch, especially from adjacent roles, becomes very easy. So I see a lot of folks from QA moving into product. I see a lot of folks from business analysts moving into product, project management, moving into product marketing, moving into product, so all of the teams who actually work with product teams. So I think that is one big bucket I've seen. And I think for a lot of people who don't work in companies that have product teams, they actually try to get it externally. So that is another route. I think a lot of people, start their own thing. They completely leave working at companies. There's a small fraction. But I don't think that there is one, the route, because I think everyone's background and experiences is different, right? Like it's very unique. And I think that's what I've found so far.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point around, especially the fact that a lot of organizations don't have product manager roles. And obviously people within the organization are going to realize they want to be product managers. And if they want to be one, they'll probably have to leave as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, I mean, joining Uber Freight. So specifically, it was our head of product had come down to Chicago where I was working at the time. And he was just speaking casually with some analysts and talking about, he was talking about his product philosophy around how there is no user error actually if you design things and build things the right way. And to me, that was really inspiring. And so that was when it really clicked for me that that's something that I want to grow into. I want to start to learn how to think like him. And I noticed that of our product managers, it seemed like maybe a third came from engineering directly, and then they kind of moved over. So that wasn't me. Another third kind of came from business school in Stanford, Harvard, you name it. And then the other third moved in from either an operations role, or we actually have product operations. So product operations, I'll assume most people are familiar with it. It's especially even become more popular even in the last 2 years. But I think Uber specifically was early with product ops. And so it seemed like the few product managers who didn't come from engineering or didn't come from like top business schools had come from switching in from product operations. And so I was lucky enough in that pretty much 6 months after being at Uber Freight, product operations role had opened up, and I was more or less already preparing for that as well, too, working my butt off to try to set myself up for doing that. And then I was able to move into the product operations role. And when I joined, it was really clear too. I said, hey, longer term, I want to be a product manager, but it was also transparent because a lot of people mentioned that they want to be product managers. So I was transparent in the fact that I see this as a multi-year journey, and I'm going to join product operations, not as a waypoint to a larger goal, but because product operations is super valuable in and of itself. And I want to add value in the product operations org. I want to maximize my value here. And I think being transparent about it was also really helpful because it meant that everybody knew what my intentions were. It led to creating some mentorship opportunities, people taking me under their wing, showing me a little bit more, I think, than they otherwise would have had I not mentioned that I wanted to be a product manager. And so for me, I went business analyst. It was like 9 months later, officially, I became on the product operations team. I was there for, I think, almost 2 years. I was promoted within product operations. And then after that, I moved over to product manager. So for me, it was around like 2.5 years from the time I identified I wanted to be a product manager to actually becoming one officially. And I'll add, though, too, I think most people who move into the product manager role do that role unofficially for probably a year and a half. And for me, that was totally the case for me too. It felt like the majority of time I was on product ops, it felt like I was actually being a product manager. I just didn't have the title and I was paid less. And that was frustrating as hell. But patience is a total virtue to becoming a product manager. And humility too. And I always try to look at it as a long-term game, which it totally is. And I'm really glad I still try to look at it the same way too, right? I could probably leave to a different company right now and become a senior product manager. But is that the best thing for my growth? I don't think so. So I try to think about it long-term.
And that is something that I absolutely loved, even in our conversations in the past, Jason. I think, and I've been guilty of, I think, being super hungry for, a shortcut path or kind of shortening the path for whatever that success definition looks like. Because I think a lot of times, I think it's just the world we live in, right? With the definition, society's definition of what success is, or how fast you need to keep on, I think, jumping and then growing your career. And
let me just add on that.
Go ahead.
I think there's a big advantage for people who come from diverse backgrounds in being humble about it as well. Like first generation college student, for me, right, I was making more money than my parents my first job out of college, which wasn't very flashy. So I didn't need to try to go for a role which was just maximizing the amount of money that I wanted. Whereas a lot of people who are leaving from Harvard or Stanford, like they are really hungry for that title and that money. And arguably, in a lot of cases, it's at the expense of like learning and development. And so I actually think that's a real advantage that people from diverse backgrounds have too.
Absolutely. And I know Ashish has put his hands up, and Ashish, I'm going to let you ask that question. I think just a couple things I wanted to mention there. One, if someone wants to be really successful and a good product manager, even a great product manager, I think there are a few things that I've heard time and time and time again from all the different leaders that I've talked with. One is the humility piece that Jason was talking about. This is a role that's going to test your ego multiple times in a day. You know, you are going to probably be the most generalist person that can be in the room. You're not going to have answers to majority of the questions, and yet there is a lot of pressure to be aligning the teams towards a certain direction and facilitating decisions. And I think a lot of people get into product management because they're like, well, I'm going to make decisions and I'm going to make an impact and I'm going to tell everyone what to do. And, you know, the so-called CEO, kind of the myth that's there, it's really not that. And something that I've learned is that you don't make decisions as a PM, you facilitate decisions by getting the right people in the room, whether it's virtual or whether it's physical room. And I think the second thing, Jason, that you brought up that I just loved is the piece around, I think, the continuous thing of learning and growing and the resiliency. If you want to be a great PM, and these are traits that hiring managers actually look for, right? And they come out pretty easily in a few interactions during the interview process as well. And that is around how resilient you are and how much of learning and unlearning you do. Because I think a lot of us, we just focus so much on learning new skills that over time, our brain just gets cluttered with everything that we've learned. And if we want to be successful in a new context, then I think we need to declutter. And that's where that unlearning comes in. So I think that is super important as well. And I think the third thing that you talked about, Jason, and that was around diverse backgrounds. And that is super important because I think a lot of people think you have to have an MBA if you want to be a product manager, because we've seen that in job descriptions. You know, you have to come from a tech background. And clearly not. I mean, I can give so many examples from PM Dojo as well. Like, Jason, you are one example, right? Like, you've transitioned not from Stanford comm science. You had a very different degree and you came in. And you are a PM now. We've seen folks who are teachers and actors. We've seen folks who are ultrasound technicians and lab technicians. We've seen folks who are massage therapists and who have transitioned into product management. And these are alumni from PM Dojo. So I've hired people. I've hired someone who used to work as a social work consultant. And she used to work in hospitals, and I had hired her many years ago, and she's now leading a team of product managers. So, you know, I think you need to have those certain skills and traits. And a lot of people who come from diverse backgrounds actually make great PMs. You just have to find, I think, the right environment and the right opportunity. Not every role is going to be right? Ashish, do you want to maybe unmute yourself if you can come on the camera and ask your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, Jason, and hi, Bhaski. Thanks for organizing this session. I have a couple of questions. The first one for Jason and the second one for both Bhaski and Jason. So, Jason, like, I want to understand what skills did you learn the hard way in product operations that you thought you could have learned as a business analyst? Because I think the transition from business analyst to product operations to product manager, where you said that product operations was something like a product manager that you were working. So there are this, I mean, I would like to know what skills you learned the hard way. And the second question I have is regarding the transition to product management. So I'll just give a little bit of background. So I worked in the tech industry for more than 10 years. Then I took a break to do my master's. I'm in Germany right now. So from the market point of view, in Germany, the product management is kind of not well defined in companies. You have different kind of, you know, job opportunities. And for me, it is I'm finding it challenging to kind of navigate that through. So my last role was a business analyst. So, and since you transitioned from business analyst to product management, do you recommend to kind of enter into a senior business analyst kind of a role in a company that offers product management, or just do business analyst and then find your way out into product management some way, maybe by luck or by chance? I mean, I would like to get a perspective on that.
These are some great questions, Ashish. Thank you for asking. Jason, do you want to take the first one, and I can definitely share some perspective on the second? Would love your take as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like everything I've learned has just been the hard way, by the way. When I moved into product ops, I went into it probably with the wrong expectation, which is that I felt like I was just going to nail it right off the bat. I felt like I was, kicking butt as a business analyst. And I had no idea how much I was shielded from what actually happens on a product development team. And so moving from business analyst to product operations taught me everything about how a product team actually operates in ways that I had no idea about before. So how scrums are run, how collaboration between design and product is facilitated, how product decisions are made, which to Bosky's point, turns out, oops, it's not actually the product manager making all decisions. It's the facilitation that actually leads to those decisions. And so there was everything about how the product team runs. And then the other one was really about stakeholder management. So for me, I've always been really strong analytically. And as a business analyst, I could do all the analysis and then share those takeaways and then use that to lead with recommendations. And the downside about moving to product operations for me was that I was going to be doing less of what I was strong at, which is being an analyst, and doing more about what I'm weak at, which is stakeholder management. And I'll also caveat that with, at the time, I thought I was great at stakeholder management anyways. And then that move was difficult because I didn't want to work on something that I felt like I would be doing worse at than my peers, even though I knew it was going to be most helpful for me in transitioning to product. But then, also it turned out that, so much of the job actually of the product operations job was stakeholder management. And yeah, I just learned a lot about it in ways that I was strong, in ways that I was weak. And I think it was great testing ground. And then just to, tease a little bit on what that means for that second question, which is really about like, is it better to go to senior business analyst or some other role and then into a product manager? For me, I could have waited and then been promoted within business to like a senior business analyst and then gone someplace else. I'm so glad that I didn't. And it's because I learned so much in my product operations role. And I don't know if that accelerated my journey to product management, but I sure as hell know it made me a stronger product manager having gone through that. And so for me, I personally chose to just prioritize learning, even if that meant not having a promotion earlier on. And I'm really glad that I did.
Thank you, Jason. I think you brought about the stakeholder management piece, and I think stakeholder management, especially for folks who are, I think, coming from, let's say, a BA role or maybe a project management role, what stakeholder management looks like in those two roles looks completely different in product management space. So we lump it around stakeholder management, but at the end of the day, it's not like you're just going to go and give status and say, oh, this is at risk, this is red, this is green, this is what the timeline looks like. It's none of that. A lot of it is about aligning. And a lot of it is about socializing. And a lot of it is about building those relationships and building those allies. And I used to think early on in my career, very, very early on, I think it was probably like 2 or 3 years in, and I used to get really frustrated with the amount of this kind of socialization that I had to do in order to be effective at my job. And I thought it was all politics. And I used to really get frustrated. And I had this mentor, and I would kind of go to him and I would be like, I just cannot do politics. Like, this is not something that I want to, like, why should I be going and, like being nice to all of these senior leadership just to kind of make sure that the business is doing the thing that it's supposed to be doing? Like, isn't it obvious? And I still remember what he said. And I'm thankful for, a lot of those hard learnings that came in, because it didn't come in like, oh, Bosky, let me tell you, like, he was really mad because of how much I was kind of pulling this thing on for months. And he said, there is no politics. This is influencing up and managing across and managing down. And it is about how you want to make sure that you have allies and champions in your organization who you can reach out to when you need help in order to kind of bring in that alignment, because that's what you're doing. You are the referee, and you are, this person in the orchestra who's kind of, letting all the different folks who are playing these different instruments kind of come in with a melody, and that's all that you're going to be doing. So you have to have support, and you cannot do everything by yourself. And so I think I just wanted to kind of mention that you have to reframe a lot of the things that you perhaps were doing in your previous adjacent roles and what that might look like in the context of product management. Because I see a lot of PMs who treat stakeholder management, because that's an important piece, the same way like before. And I think that's what Jason is talking about, right? A lot of things that he needed to change in order to get that buy-in and influence, because everything is an influence as a PM. I think, Ashish, to your second question, so I'm somewhat familiar with the market in Germany. So yes, I mean, compared to the US, and again, in US, there are certain pockets. Of course, you have the Valley. You know, when I worked in Atlassian, product management looked very, very different in the Bay Area. Then you have New York, which is kind of climbing up, and it's becoming a really, really good pocket for product management because there are a number of companies there. But then the rest of the US, you don't find a lot of. Seattle is another strong ground, but the rest of the US also you don't find, right? The same level of maturity, I think, when it comes to product. Same thing you're going to find across the world. But in Germany, you know, when I talk with a few of our mentors and a few of the fellows in our community, there is a very big startup scene. So I think something to think about, again, as people are trying to transition into product is, what might be some of those milestones and pathways that might eventually lead you into that role, assuming here that product management is definitely the path that you want to get into, right? It might not be the destination. You can find that maybe a few years you do product management and then you somehow don't like it. I was speaking with a senior PM at Meta yesterday, and in my coaching session, it came up, where she was asking, you know, do you think this is even a role for me? You know, I'm so exhausted. And I'm so burnt out right now. Is this the right path for me? So I think treat product management as a part of the destination, a milestone. It's not the destination. So I think that's what I wanted to share. But I think in Germany, like think about, you know, are there startups that I can join where maybe they have to kind of launch their product? They may have just launched their product, but now they have to kind of scale it and make it bigger. Those are the pockets and opportunities where they're going to need someone with PM skills. And I'm saying PM skills. The title might be different. And try to see if you can kind of, you know, pitch your case there, right? Based on what you have done, based on what the company needs, and see if you can kind of sneak in that way. Regarding BA, SBA, I don't know if there is, again, a recipe, Ashish. It might happen that, you know, you may find that after becoming an SBA, if it gives you more skills and more experience that a PM role is going to need, maybe. But if there is an opportunity right now that you can seek, why leave it for 2 years later? That's how I see it. And I think you mentioned about just let it happen by luck. I do not believe in letting your career happen by luck. You have to own it and you have to manage it like a product, which means you have to think about your career roadmap. You have to think about what experiments you can run, inexpensive experiments you can run that takes you closer to your career goal, and pivot and refine accordingly. Like, just manage your career like a product. So you may say, you know what, maybe I'm going to try pitching myself to a few companies casually and see what happens. You know, and maybe you're going to learn that your pitch sucks, and that means you have to work on your pitch. Maybe you're going to see, well, you know what, certain kind of pitches are working. Now you need to optimize that and see where that in is. But if you can get an in now, why wait 2 years to get an SBA? Because those two roles are very, very different. Does that kind of make sense, Ashish?
Absolutely. I mean, thanks, Jason and Baski for your thoughts. I mean, I think it totally makes sense. I think one thing that I find in Germany a little bit challenging is first the roles, or even, you know, as I mentioned, product owner and product manager and project manager are kind of interchangeably used in the project descriptions. And also what I've kind of faced recently is kind of a chicken and egg problem. Like they say, even for a, let's say, junior PM role, say you should have 3 to 4 years of or 2 to 3 years of product management experience. And I'm like, okay, how to get that? So kind of just getting through maybe the screening, where, you know, you never know what happens in the screening, whether they just, because I applied to a couple of internships and then I got a feedback from the HR saying that, you know what, kind of, you don't have product management experience. So I'm like, okay, internships are supposed to be that testing ground to get that experience. So I think that's where I guess I feel the challenge in Germany is right now. Maybe product management is very much maybe matured in the US. And I feel in Germany, it is still kind of picking up and the roles are not kind of completely defined. And even a lot of companies don't even know whether they need a product manager or they need a scrum master, or maybe they need a product owner. So kind of that makes it even challenging.
So Ashish, you're not alone, and it's not Germany alone. You're going to be surprised that even in US, companies do the same thing. There are still junior PM roles where they're asking 5 years of experience. There are still, they will still post it as a project manager, call it, product owner is not a job. It is one of those roles that comes from the agile world. So it's not a formal role. But what I'm saying is that the chicken and egg is everywhere globally. And I think for that, you have to understand what's happening in the market, not just right now. This has been the case forever, and something that I've learned is that it doesn't go away even after your first break. So let's say you're a director, you're trying for a VP role, right? Let's say you've got tons of years of experience, but you're trying for a VP role and it's your first time trying for a VP role. You will compete against folks who already have 2-3 stints of being a VP. You're going to again experience chicken and egg problem. This is something that I had to kind of really accept and learn much later on in my life, because I thought the chicken and egg was something that's just going to be for my first early careers, 1-2 years when I'm trying for roles. But no, it doesn't go away. And so again, this was one of those very hard moments of truths that one of my mentors had to pull me out and say, and the words and these, like, I can still play it out in my head because they're so vivid and they're almost 12-15 years ago. And she said, you have 2 choices. You can either continue to mope and feel bad and be like, what am I going to do because of this chicken and egg problem? Or you need to start thinking about ways that you're going to overcome it. And for me, overcoming that was putting up my hands up in the first startup that I worked and trying to do a role that I'd never done before. Only years later, I came to know that was elements of product management. Whether it was putting my hands up and saying, you know what, I'm going to lead marketing. I don't care, I've never done marketing, but I'm going to lead marketing and from a growth perspective, and I'm going to do that. Whether it was putting my hands up for a very, very visible initiative that I had no idea and I didn't have, whether it was actually upskilling and getting those skills and experiences that makes me confident to take on those. Like, there were things that I had to strategically do in my career. And so I think that is some food for thought for you. And the second thing, if you're kind of feeling like you don't have that experience, I mean, that's why communities and programs like PM Dojo exist, because in PM Dojo, you get that experience of working with a cross-functional team and stepping into the role of a PM. So, reach out to me later on. We can definitely kind of talk about that if you are wanting to, but you have to kind of take control of those reins, because it doesn't matter whether you're in Germany, whether you're in India, whether you're in UK, whether you're in Africa or US. Even though product management is more mature in US, you will still find that the chicken and egg problem exists and companies are looking for people who have done the job before, because you're competing against people who are in the market now looking for the same job as you. That's just
makes total sense, yeah.
Right. Jason, we have a question from Samuel, and he says, I've had a few coffee chats with people in different roles, but I am not sure that I'm making the most out of them. How do you approach these? And what is your advice for how to get the most of these conversations? I'm assuming here that these are people outside of Samuel's company. So I'm assuming these are all cold outreaches, but if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, Samuel, if you're able to, would you mind sharing what you're hoping to get out of these coffee chats?
Yeah, totally. I've just been kind of trying to kind of find the role that I'm looking for next. I'm not entirely sure that the role I'm in now is what I want to be doing long term. So yeah, I've been kind of trying to have these conversations with other people to see if I can expand into that role and it would be a good fit for me. And yeah.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. I've gone through the same thing. I have very close friends who are in very similar positions, and they take a lot of coffee chats to just learn more about what it's like being in that role. Just to offer my 2 cents, a lot of roles are, regardless of the title, it's kind of what you make it. And I kind of think, if you're still exploring, if you don't think that the current role that you're in is a good fit for you, and you're trying to figure out what would be a good role, as far as I know, there's nothing holding you back from just exploring within your current role, trying to support and solve other problems that exist. I've always, whenever I've looked for the next role, I've always seen personally myself as essentially working 2 jobs. One is my day-to-day role, and I do everything that I need to do for my current role, regardless of how much I like doing that, sometimes more than others. And then the other side is I do everything that either I want to do or I'm just trying out for the first time. A lot of that I think is maybe personal preference. I find that learning by doing is the best way for me to understand it. In a coffee chat, as somebody communicates what they do for their role, there's a lot of abstraction. It's tough to visualize what I actually like that. So I don't know. I don't think maybe the answer is coffee chats aren't the best route for that. It's a good way to learn, but to really experience it and be confident of it, maybe like different routes are a good fit.
Thank you, Jason. Samuel, I had a question, a follow-up question, I think, or maybe a clarifying question. When you say you're not getting most of it, why do you think you're not getting most of it? Like, why do you feel that?
I don't know. I think it's just because those chats are so like abstract. It's not like there's a clear endpoint to them. It's not like a job interview, where you're like, oh, I did well, and so here I'm moving on to the next step. And so I think it's difficult for me, I guess, to kind of determine what that endpoint is. And I guess maybe that's on me because I'm not going into it with what I'm exactly wanting to get out of it. But yeah, so I think it's just difficult for me to kind of determine that.
Got it.
I'd add maybe that I think coffee chats are really helpful if you're trying to understand maybe a specific concern about that role. So for me, before I moved into product ops, I had a big concern, which was that product ops, it seemed like they spend 90% of their day just triaging bugs. They're basically QA. And I really didn't want to do that. And so I had some coffee chats to kind of scope that out. And a lot of it was really abstract and not really helpful. The answer that I got was kind of an answer, which was, yeah, bug triaging is a lot of it and it kind of sucks, but there's other good aspects of the role. But in that, I was really intentional about trying to answer a specific question with a coffee chat. So maybe that's part of it too.
It possibly is. And I think I may just add just food for thought, Samuel. So I am a fan of these coffee chats. Like I do this even when I have been at work to kind of get to know people, I think on a non-project, non-work basis, because I think that again helps to bring alignment. But if you're kind of trying to figure out from a career standpoint, I've done that. But I think something that I've learned over the years is we have to be I think very intentional about these coffee chats, but at the same time also go with zero expectations. So it's kind of like this balance, because if we come up with a very, very specific agenda, so I see a lot of times people will request a coffee chat with me and they're like, so I had someone request a coffee chat yesterday. I don't know this person at all, just random email that came through LinkedIn. Want to meet for coffee. I'm kind of searching for a role. I've kind of moved in here internationally. And I would love for you to connect me with your network so that I can get a job. That ain't happening. That puts a lot of pressure on me to be opening up my network. I don't know you. So I think if you go with this specific agenda, I think you may just not even have the other person entertain. And I've seen that happen even with me on both sides. So I think sometimes there is a balance about, I think, whether you want to go with the expectation, how much pressure you're going to put to the other person, because then the other person has to commit, especially if you don't know them. And I think the second thing is just like when you do research as a PM, you have to have research goal. Otherwise, we're just going to end up asking random questions. And at the end of the user research or user interview, we're going to come up with zero insights. Like that's what happens. And so I think before we do these coffee chats, I think it's important to kind of look up those people's profile and their background and what do they care for, if we can find that out. And then come up with like, what is the research goal? Like, what is the goal out of this coffee chat? What do I want to get out? And then figure out how you want to frame those questions. if you're trying to understand what does, let's say, product management look like in that company, or maybe it is about how did you get to where you are, or maybe it is about, you know, can you connect me, like who, and if you feel like your conversation is going well, I've always asked the person, who is someone else that I should talk to, right? Because again, early on in my career, my network was not as strong and I needed to build that. And every time I had a coffee chat, I would always ask the person, you know, can you, is there another person that you can connect me with? And oftentimes that's how I built my network over the years. But I think you have to kind of be intentional about what you want to find out. And then if you already know that your conversations are not yielding in the results that you are expecting, it gives you a signal that now you need to refine and you need to pivot and you need to change. So you can see that there are a lot of product management skills that you can apply in the real life as well, right? Does that help?
Yeah, that definitely does. Thank you both so much for that.
Anytime, anytime. Are there any questions for Jason? I've got one out here that we had received, but I just want to pause here and see if there are any questions for Jason. Okay, I think a question that I have for you here that someone had asked, and that is, now that you're a product manager, how do you continue to learn and grow? I mean, every day there's something new. How do you learn and grow?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely evolved as I've been a product manager for 2 years now. So frankly, when I officially became a product manager, it felt like, at least for a little while, it was more about keeping my head above water. Again, same situation where I felt like I was prepared. I felt like I was doing the product manager job for the longest time. But as soon as I was given all the responsibilities, I realized that there were a lot of aspects of it that were really hidden from me. And yeah, so the first year after officially becoming a product manager, it was really just learning by doing, working with my team, you know, trying to, stay positive as I feel like I'm taking punches every single day. After that first adjustment period, let's call that, I felt like I had the opportunity or actually, sorry, to qualify that as well. So there's keeping your head above water, but there's also the kind of supplementing it in some areas. So for example, I knew communication was an area that I was a bit more strained in when I moved into that product manager role. And so to support that, I would, just read other Medium articles or books and talk to, my coffee chats would be talking to people about who I saw doing really well at something and talking about what are tactics that they have that could support me in that as well too. Now that I have a bit more stability in where I'm at, I think it's, much more the long game with it, where it's kind of regular material. I think what Bosky said around, building a team of advocates and stakeholders, that's right. I'm just at the beginning of learning how important that is right now. And so for me, that's the thing I'm really working on. But also for me, that's not something that you learn about through reading a book. I know I'm going to learn about that through a team sport, and it's going to hurt a lot to learn about that. And so I just try to, for me, it's about diligence and, perseverance, where there's a lot of things I don't want to do. And I'm trying to be really, really, trying to persevere through that and, do them anyways, because I know it's the thing that's going to make our team operate the most and make me learn and grow as a person too. So that's the current way that I'm learning the most right now. But yeah.
Thank you. No, that is great, Jason. I think you have to just continue to learn and grow. And I think one phrase that kind of summarizes, I think, for anyone in any role in the tech industry, just because the tech industry moves so fast and there's a new thing coming every day, is a concept called just-in-time learning. I think early on I used to put a lot of pressure on myself that I had to learn everything and I had to learn it then and there. And I think over time, it's just impossible. It's just impossible. I'm never going to learn everything at the same time. And it's not like a university program, right, where there is a curriculum and you have to do this and then you kind of finish it off. And so I think for me, it was really about prioritizing. I think what is relevant to learn now that's going to be able to help me with the next step, and having that foresight of what are one or two things that I need to learn, and what are one or two things that's going to help me long term, not just short term, and then kind of going from there, and not just doing something just for the sake of doing. And I think for a lot of you who are trying to transition into product management, you may be also thinking about certifications and things like that. I just want to ask you, request you, pray, please stay away from certifications, because certifications is not going to help you. As a hiring manager, they do not look at certifications. We had Marty Kagan come in a few months ago, and he called them ridiculous. And he said, any hiring manager he knows also considers certificates in product management ridiculous, because they'll teach you things in a very hypothetical way. They're going to teach you theory that you can find in Google anywhere. Hiring managers don't look at them. You can get them for free. They don't give you experience. So again, if you're struggling with the chicken and egg that Ashish was talking about, no certification is going to give you that. So I think, you have to kind of figure out how you want to do that, and whether that is by making those transitions internally, whether that is asking where you can help and support a product team. Product teams are the least staffed teams in any company, and they desperately need help because there are very few PMs, and much more of the other teams. So they are resource constrained. Where you can help and build on those skills, joining programs like PM Dojo definitely helps. Working on a side project, as long as you can kind of show the mastery of that craft and not just do it just because you're following a process. So I think those are some of the things that help. But again, thank you so much. I can hang on for the next few minutes to answer any questions. But Jason, again, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you joining us today. This was amazing. Ashish, do you have a question for Jason, or can we let Jason go?
It depends.
I can hang on for about 5 more minutes.
Jason has a couple of minutes. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Go ahead.
So I'm really curious about one thing, Jason. So I mean, I read a lot about product management. It is about a lot of different things: user empathy, stakeholder management, blah blah blah. Like, when you started your journey as a product manager, what are the 2 things that you optimize your learning for, and you realize through your coffee chats with different people that you talk to that are more important for somebody who's transitioning to product management and can help them to really do their job better?
Yeah. Well, number one, I think it's going to be different for everybody depending on what your strengths and weaknesses are. The headwind here is that really, really understanding what the needs of the product manager are is really difficult, especially because it's going to be different depending on your organization, your team within the organization. So the skills that you need relative to your strengths and weaknesses, it's going to be different depending on your situation. To speak specifically to my experience, as I was identifying my journey and what was getting me there, I went through phases. Number one was like, I was reading books about design so I could be, so I could understand design language. That was number one. Number two, I did think I needed to understand engineering a little bit better. So I took a web development boot camp. It was a full part-time boot camp for 6 months. I did that. That was helpful. Number three, I think, was the biggest one though, which was that my working style was very geared towards individual contributor, right? So I would, as an analyst or in product ops, I would do individual work and then I would share it and then I would iterate on it and then I would bring it back. And product management is 100% a team sport. And, it became clear like that was going to be the biggest thing holding me back from managing a high performing team and then also growing my career as a product manager. It's also the difficult thing to improve because it's not a hard skill, it's a soft skill. You can't practice it alone, you have to practice it together. And so that's where I have been focusing my time. It's where I currently am still focusing my time. But I think that's a good generalized one as well too, because I think it's pretty safe to say a product management is going to be a team sport pretty much everywhere. And so if you're coming from a more individualized track, that's probably a safe route to go as well.
Thanks a lot.
I would 100% agree, I think, with what Jason was saying. I think I'm going to add maybe a couple things that you don't typically see in a job description, but they are at the back of the head of every hiring manager. So I think one would be a trait called high agency. And you're going to probably hear Shreyas Doshi, he talks a lot about it. And high agency is something where I think in a lot of other roles, you can get away with it, but as a PM, you absolutely need it. And what that means is that most of the problems that you're going to be encountering as a PM, they're ambiguous, and most likely majority of the folks in the company won't have any idea of how to solve it. But you need to have enough of this high agency trait to be able to at least unfold it, unpack it, bring more clarity by asking those better questions, and at least make some progress, so that even if you're not able to solve it fully, but at least be able to, again, make some progress so that you can then figure out after a few steps, well, how might you actually, again, solve it? And how can you not just wait for someone to give you all the things? A lot of the times they're not going to be, never will you be as a PM handed down everything, and you'll have to kind of figure it out. And that problem solving takes a whole different meaning as a PM. So I think that high agency is a very, very important trait. I think business acumen is a very, very important trait for a product manager. And this is not going and getting an MBA, but this is about having curiosity and understanding the different business levers of what you're working on and what is the most important thing. How is that going to be impacting the business goals? And I think one classic mistake I think I see a lot of new PMs, even some experienced PMs make, is that, well, we're going to look at the deck, we're going to look at what we hear in the all hands. But a lot of times you have to infer, and you have to be able to connect the dots, and you have to be able to, again, be able to see what's happening in the industry, the market, at a much deeper level, not just superficial level, to be able to draw those insights and then use them to be either facilitating decisions or be able to making sense of the world. So for me, I think even when I'm looking at candidates, I look at these two skills very, very highly. So hopefully that helped, Ashish.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Are there any questions, I think, for me? And again, Jason, thank you so much for joining me today. This was absolutely a blast having you, and so good to see you after such a long time.
Likewise, thanks so much for having me. I do have to take off, but happy to let's stay in touch. Likewise as well, if you're on this call, reach out on LinkedIn. Happy to chat as well too if you have other questions. So
thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to stay along. If anyone has any questions, happy to answer.